Geoff Mosher is here today from the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com, and you can check out their podcast on all podcasting platforms. Just search Inside the Birds. We're going to get to Mosher in just a couple of minutes here. He's got a little something that's going to cause him to be a couple minutes late, but he will be here for Inside the Birds football at 4. 609-403-0973, 609-403-0973. A lot of text messages coming in. Rick and EHT, the analytic department is making the decisions, and the coordinators are calling the plays. What does Sirianni do? That is like one of the dumbest questions, period. Like, what does Sirianni do? Mike Tomlin doesn't call plays. John Harbaugh doesn't call plays. There's a ton of coaches in this league that don't call plays. Like, what year do we think this is that the coach is calling all the plays and doing everything? What does calling the plays? You know, there was a time where Doug Peterson called the plays, and then people complained. He needs to give up the play calling because it's too much on his plate. The CEO, head coach, is the guy who makes the decisions, and I feel like fans have a really hard time with somebody being, we have this thought that the coach does everything and that the assistants are just a waste and they do nothing. The head coach is, and we, I guess, just don't put enough emphasis as fans. We just don't care enough about culture. And, do the players want to play for you? Do the players like playing for the head coach? He doesn't call the plays. He doesn't, do what I think you perceive the head coach of a football team does. I think back in the day, I don't know how old you are, Rich, but my intuition was you're an older gentleman, and I say older, I'm 47. When I grew up, you didn't know the coordinator's name. You had no idea who the coordinator was. You didn't know who the defensive coordinator was. You didn't know who the offensive coordinator was. You just knew who the head coach was. And I feel like a lot of people still feel like it's the same, where the head coach just does everything. He calls the play. Yeah, he calls the offense. He calls the defense. He's the special teams coach. He does everything. You just blame him for everything. Like that question to me, what does the head coach do? Well, I think it's quite apparent that the head coach is the guy who makes these decisions. We're going to go for it on fourth down. We're not going to go for it on fourth down. We're going to punt. We're not going to punt. There's a lot of game planning leading up to the game. You said a team needs a leader as a head coach, not a bunch of guys with calculators telling you what to do. Then, Rick, you need to just find a new sport. If you don't like the way the game is going, that's the way the game's going. The analytics are a part of the game. We can all say we don't like it. That's never going away. But I think what Nick Sirianni is, if anything, is a guy that these players like playing for and the leader of the football team. He sets the culture of the team that, oh, by the way, Rick went to the Super Bowl 2 years ago. So evidently he does something right. Let's get into it. Geoff Mosher is here. He spoke today, and he really broke down a lot of decisions, and he threw analytics out there, and the charts say this. And, of course, the text messages coming in are really going after that way of thought. What does Sirianni do? If the charts are telling him what to do, what does he do? Are we already 2 weeks into the season, Jeff, questioning what Nick Sirianni's role on this team is?
I'm not questioning his role on the team. I think, there are plenty of CEO head coaches who do a whole lot of things and make those big decisions during the game that he does. That's what a head coach's job is. I think there's a fair question to the way he uses analytics. And it's a big argument within the sports community itself, Mike, this. But, the hardcore analytics people will tell you that you're either abiding by what the analytics say because mathematically that's your best advantage, or you're just not. And if you're trying to mix gut with analytics, you're actually doing a disservice to your decision making, because the analytics is designed to take the guesswork out and the gut out of the decision so that more often than not, you're going to succeed because you're going the way the analytics tell you to do it. You're not going to always succeed, but more often than not, whereas with gut, it's a 50-50 proposition each time. So when you look at the game, Mike, I think you can question why he would be aggressive in some cases and passive in others. You were aggressive on 3rd and 3 and you threw a ball when you could have ran. Then on 4th and 3, you kicked a field goal. On your opening drive, you get into a 4th down situation where you don't take the points, you are aggressive and go for it. So why did you kick the field goal later in the game, at the end of the game, when you didn't get it on 3rd and 3? So he has tended to gravitate both ways as a head coach, where sometimes he's pushing the analytics button, sometimes he's pushing the gut button. It's not that he's unprepared. He told you that he looks at his own, he makes up his own chart and he has his own statistics that tell him what to do. But if you look at I look at the 2017 Super Bowl team, like, it just felt like Doug was going to push the pedal on the analytics every single time, right? And the players said that year that his aggression, especially on 4th down and 2-point conversions, it galvanized them. They felt confident that when they got into a situation, they could get it because their head coach showed a lot of confidence in them. And I don't think Sirianni helps that by being sometimes really aggressive and sometimes not. I think you got to either be one way or the other for most of the time. Now, every once in a while, there's a situation where maybe it's just you got to know your quarterback, your running back, your defense, right? You can't like completely go it and just ignore all the other context. But I think Doug Peterson's aggression and going with what the analytics said in 2017 was a big reason why the Eagles won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and for the most part, Nick's been pretty aggressive. They went to the Super Bowl a couple of years ago in part because they took chances and they were aggressive. He really went through the whole thought process today about why and how and all it's done, and I wouldn't go back and change anything. But a lot of that was predicated, Moshe, on why he kicked the field goal as opposed to going for it on 4th down. Do you think that is a bigger decision than why throw over pass on 3rd down?
Yes, I do. Well, I mean, I certainly think that they're equally weighted, if not a bigger decision. And to your point, I think people are so fixated on the Barkley drop and not the decision to then kick the field goal versus going for it there, that they haven't really thought about why he was more passive in that scenario, whereas he was more aggressive earlier in the game.
Yeah, because earlier in the game, I guess, was it 4th down and 4? They ended up going for it. They did not get it, and that's right. And the ESPN.
You should never, right? You should never let that kind of context, unless you just thought you were unprepared, right? You shouldn't let not getting it influence your decision the next time around.
Right, but and they didn't get it, and though the analytics, according to ESPN that night, they pointed it out, said they're doing the right thing. They're going for it on 4th down. Now, I don't know why the analytics would suggest go for it on 4th down and 4 at that moment. I don't know how the analytics even come up with that data to say you should go for it in this spot. That's where I think it's a little weird that you would rely on the analytics in that moment, because where's the data coming from?
Well, I mean, that is an argument against sort of the analytics, is that the data it takes into account every single scenario, which many of them lack their own context. Is the sample size full of a bunch of people going for it with backup quarterbacks, because constantly quarterbacks are hurt in this league compared to starting quarterbacks. There's a ton of variables that go into creating these numbers. And so that's why I say you either abide by it or you don't. Trying to weave in between both it's going to yield the same result, where sometimes you're going to be right, sometimes you're going to be wrong, instead of most times one way or the other.
All right, Moshe, obviously there's a lot that continues to kind of just everybody's on this play and everything's on the field goal, and he talked a lot about it today. But I want to kind of get into the things that happened in that game that we're worried about that we think are going to be a problem now through 2 weeks. And I think at the top of that list has to be your pass rush, correct? Would you say after 2 weeks now, all right, week 1, weird field, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. after week 2 of seeing this pass rush, is this going to be a problem?
Well, that's a great question. I think a pass rush can only really kick in when you have the offense in behind the sticks or in unmanageable third downs. That's when you really need your pass rush to come in. It's hard to rush the passer when they're getting rid of the ball quickly or when they've got you working off play action a whole lot and you have to play the run first, which is what the Falcons did. And they did that, Mike, because they ran the ball not just effectively, but prolifically, right? So for the second straight week, the Eagles got absolutely gashed and shredded between the 20s in run defense. So while we can sit here and talk for 20 minutes on all the pass rushers and all the issues that they're having getting to the quarterback, it's got to start with the run defense and putting the offense in unfavorable situations.
Well, listen, I'm not asking them to have 70 sacks like they did a couple of years ago, but do you see any evidence that that this pass rush can be better? In other words, like, hey, Bryce Huff, you signed him for $51 million. Yeah, he's off to a slow start, but I do think that he'll get going. Nolan Smith hasn't done anything. He was a first-round pick, but I do think he will be able to get going. Do you feel that way about those two particular players?
Well, that's a two-part question. No, there's zero evidence after 2 games that you would say Nolan Smith or Bryce Huff or Josh Sweat are going to really suddenly pick up the pace and do what they're, do better. But you know how football is. You know the ebb and flows of the game. You know things can change. Schemes can change. Alignments can change. Players can get put in better positions. If you go back to Jonathan Gannon's first year, do you remember how bad the Eagles were defensive? Remember that Kansas City game where they didn't have a dime package to match up? I mean, the Eagles were giving up a historical amount of yards in or even last year. Go take the Denver Broncos. They gave up 70 points to the Miami Dolphins in week 2 or week 3, and they were one of the worst defenses historically that you would ever see. And it would have been very easy to say the Broncos will be the worst defense in the NFL all year long because there's no evidence to suggest that they know how to play defense.
Yeah.
By the end of the year, they were, I think, like in the last 8 weeks, they played like a top 10.
Well,
defense,
and
right?
that's what I'm kind of looking at here. Is there evidence that, okay, they didn't – because I said earlier, look, you only gave up 15 points into the last drive of the game. So, I mean, you weren't horrendous. It's not like you lost the game by giving up 35 points. You had 15 points on the board with a minute left in that game. So there's something to kind of build on. But, man, against teams higher – I guess the thing is, if you're watching that team and that defense – are you saying, man, I can trust that defense can get a stop in a big moment?
Well, at this moment, no. And going into New Orleans, which has scored about 3 million points in the first 2 weeks, I'm sure everybody is thinking the worst. But I've said this on the podcast this morning. Adam and I talked about it. I'm not doom and gloom. Looking at this as the coaches, the veteran coaches, by the way, who many of them are very good, have very good reputations, are learning their players. The players are learning their coaches. We've seen this happen. I mentioned with Jonathan Gannon a couple of years ago, new scheme. Remember how Fletcher Cox is playing this 4-eye? He can't stop the run. The Eagles, I mean, I do believe my evidence is the success that these coaches have had and individually some of these players have had before to say that they will figure some things out here.
Okay, how much of the disappointment then behind the guy that I think they were really counting on is Jalen Carter? I know that we all think that he's a player and he's something, but do you have legitimate concerns that might be an issue?
I do think that I have concerns about Carter and Jordan Davis. I mean, Jordan Davis, we're on year 3 here, and we're waiting for him to make a way bigger impact. And, yeah, Jalen Carter, I thought, I know people say, like, well, he's constantly double-teamed. So is Aaron Donald. So is Fletcher Cox. So is Dexter Lawrence. Like, that's not an excuse to not be a productive player. And he hasn't been productive enough for the first 2 weeks. He had some really bad penalties in the opener. And obviously Jeff McClain from the Inquirer reported he was late to a meeting. So we know this guy has a little bit of a history of not always having his head on straight. And now you've seen him not be productive. So, yeah, I think that there's fair concern for both of those guys. The interior of this defensive line.
Yes, yeah. And from the interior, it's really the anchor of your run defense. Give me some thoughts on that, because that was one of the problems the other night was they got gashed on the ground throughout the night.
Yeah. So you're going to see it again with New Orleans because they run a very similar with Clint Kubiak there. This West Coast scheme that is a heavy outside zone run team. And what I mean by outside or wide zone is, and it's pretty easy to see when you're watching TV, the offensive linemen don't block you straight up the field. They either go horizontally to the right or horizontally to the left. It's the old Mike Shanahan style of run blocking, right? And as a defensive lineman, your job is to not sort of get caught up in that and run with them. Your job is to penetrate. You're not jump the gap, but push those guys back and not make it easy for you to take you to the left or take you to the right. And I just thought, in general, I saw it. The defensive line got taken for a ride, and you can look at the tape and say, my God, Nakobe Dean and Zach Bond were terrible. But honestly, they had 320 to 340 pound people in their face constantly because the defensive line didn't hold up its end of the bargain. No, there are very few linebackers in this league that can really make a dent or get their money's worth when they have that many offensive linemen in their face. So I don't put it on them or the secondary tackling as much as the defensive line not being able to control the line of scrimmage.
Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, Football at 4. Eagles today, Nick Sirianni speaking. There was some, Sirianni, I guess, confirmed that he did not address the team after the game and that it was Jalen Hurts was the one. Do you have a problem with the head coach not addressing his team after a loss like that?
It's certainly something I've never heard of before. I mean, almost, I'll have to look into this some more, but I'm every time you see it on video now, way more than you ever did like in the 90s or early 2000s. The coach comes in and yes, so I have seen players talk first or celebrations happen after big wins, but I've never heard of a coach just not addressing the team, but I may not have asked around enough on that.
Yeah, and I don't know, does he mean he wasn't even in the locker room? He didn't go in and it's a weird thing, but I can see if Jalen Hurts says, Coach, let me talk to the guys. I made that throw. I let us down. I mean, if Saquon Barkley was the guy that said, Coach, let me talk. Because those two, I think the Hurts finality and the Barkley drop probably to the players stand out the most in terms of I need to address this. Because talking to Colin Thompson yesterday, he said as a player, he wasn't surprised with that play at all. The players expect a play like that to kind of really – rip your heart out and just kind of the players aren't surprised by that play call, do you think, right?
No, I don't think that they were surprised at all. And I would think that if you polled most of them, they'd be pretty excited about it. Players like to be aggressive. That's why I brought up the 2017 team. They loved that Doug Peterson was so aggressive on fourth down, so aggressive going for two after touchdowns in certain situations. And it doesn't surprise. I don't think that they were shocked at all that Nick Sirianni, who, like you mentioned, has been aggressive throughout his career, was looking to go for the jugular there.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I have to find out more about whether or not Nick just did he wait or did he not talk at all? Probably pretty good though for Hurts to, as a leader of the team, to do that. Particularly coming off a game where, despite what people are saying, he wasn't very good. So I mean, at least to take his accountability was good.
609-403-0973. A lot of text messages here coming in. We'll continue to read these out throughout the day for everybody. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. And, of course, you can check that out on all podcasting platforms. The Eagles will take on the New Orleans Saints. You won't be back on the rest of the week, Mosher. Let's get a thought on the Saints from you. It's funny. We do Find Five, Ugly Five. I had the Saints in my Ugly Five to start the year. I don't know that a team's ever gone from the ugly five to the fine five, but you might have to make a good argument that they're one of the best 5 teams in the league through 2 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, if you're looking at the bright side from an Eagles standpoint, the one thing you could probably say is, well, averaging 43 points per game, scoring touchdowns on 10 straight possessions, that's fairly unsustainable in the NFL. So maybe, you could look at this saying they're walking into a buzzsaw, or you could say the Saints and Derek Carr especially are really not that good, and they've happened to face a terrible Panthers team and maybe shell-shocked the Cowboys a little bit. They're doing sort of what Kirk Cousins did to the Eagles in that they're working off great play action. Clint Kubiak has installed the same type of offense we just talked about. A lot of tight ends, fullbacks, motion, running the ball. between the tackles, which Alvin Kamara is doing a really good job of. And then just that's helped them set up really opportune pass plays to Chris Olave and really Rashid Shaheed. I thought Olave was going to benefit more from this scheme, but right now it's been Rashid Shaheed with that speed who's been able to benefit more. So, yeah, that's what the Eagles have to worry about. And then defensively, here's what you got to worry about. The Saints are always good, almost always good defensively. They're usually very good and just can't hold up their end of the bargain all year long because the offense has been so dreadful the last few years. I'd be worried about going in to that stadium. It's going to be loud. It's going to be nuts without A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts trying to, make it happen against that defense because he did not play well against the Falcons defense. Not quite sure why people keep saying he did. I get that he played gutty and gritty and had a lot of great runs, but we're year 5 here with Jalen Hurts now. And if running for first down because he leaves the pocket early is what we're congratulating him for, I think that's misguided and not beneficial.
I would agree with that. I think, one of the things that was encouraging that we did see him kind of lower the shoulder, kind of run, and kind of was more of the guy that we saw in 2022 with his legs. But the decision he makes late in the game, that's 6 straight games now that he has an interception. 6.
Yeah. And I can tell you I encourage people to listen to Inside the Tape with Greg Cosell and me and Adam tomorrow, because we've already hatched it out and found some plays, 4 or 5 plays where there's open players that he's just not seeing because he's just getting out of the pocket. And it's not like he was under a whole lot of duress, but he gets out of that pocket and he doesn't keep his eyes down the field. And then when you get out, you limit the other half of the field. There were some plays to be made that he did not make in the passing game. And just saying, hey, but he's so gritty and gutty and got them back and put 21 points on the board without A.J. Brown, I don't think it's beneficial. I think it's not right. I don't think he played a very good game.
Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com. And, of course, you can get that on all podcasting platforms. Getting ready for the Eagles and the Saints. Man, this game looked a lot different in May. It looked a lot different in May than it does right now. Saints team all of a sudden, offense. They got a good defense. They had a solid defense last year. Their offense was just kind of And here they are now with an offense with a lot of speed, well-designed plays. Sunday at 1 o'clock, you can listen to the game right here on 97.3 ESPN. All right, Moshe, we'll talk to you on Monday.
All right, take care, Mike.
Geoff Mosher will be back on Monday's edition of Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app.